Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 13th chapter in the book of Deuteronomy. Before we read and comment verse by verse, we just want to briefly review what took place in the 12th chapter. Second verse, completely destroy all the places where the nations which you are dispossessing serve their mighty ones, in the high mountains and on the hills and on every green tree. So this is Israel's commandment and instruction. They were to completely destroy the land and the people they dispossessed. They were to tear down and lay flat all of their religious idols and edifices and temples and everything else attributed to the worship of these rival deities. Now, there was nothing like... But he also differentiates, do not do so to Yahweh your Elohim, but seek the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses out of all your tribes to put his name there for his dwelling place, and there you shall enter. So Yahweh is different because he is he is authentic, he is a redeemer, he is a liberator, he is there. They are his choice possession, and he... Now, in the Old Testament, the divine presence was thought to be concentrated, but it certainly wasn't limited outside of the temple and the sacred of sacreds. But there is an exclusive point of access and worship for these people. Now, the worship, the location is not nearly as important as the spirit in which we worship. But for the Old Testament people, this was the location where his dwelling place was, and there you shall and then he says this is the place where you sacrifice, this is the place for rejoice. We read that word again in the 12th verse. We'll read the 11th first. And it shall be unto you that the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell there you are to bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your tithes and the contributions of your hands, and all your choice offerings which you vow to Yahweh. So rather than have this land with all these disparate locations of edifice, they were to have the tabernacle. This was the predecessor of the temple, and this was to be their access point, and this was where all the religiosity of Israel flew from and flowed to, and they are to rejoice once more in the 12th verse. You are to do all that I command you. We read in the 14th verse. Several of the passage we read after this are commands for ironclad, unquestioning obedience. Verse 19, guard yourself to do that you do not forsake the Levite as long as you live in your land. So the Levites were a special concern. These were the tribe that made all the religiosity happen. These were the priests, and they were assigned to conduct the religious services, and the nation was not to forsake this class of people who did not live off the land, but lived off the tithing, and they ate from the sacrifices. But as long as you live there, so too must they be. So keep them there, preserve them, treat them honorably and respectfully. Only be firm, do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life. Do not eat the life with the meat. Verse 23. This reminds us of what we read of in Leviticus chapter 17, verses 11-14, where blood is equated with life, and as such, the Israelites were forbidden to drink it or cook in it or eat in it. So blood was off limits to them, and as it was in Leviticus, so too is it in Deuteronomy. Verse 28, guard and obey all these words which I command you, that I might be well with you and your children after you forever. For when you do is good and right in the eyes of Yahweh, your Elohim. So their obedience is an investment towards their progeny, towards their future, for the sustenance and the maintenance of their nation, to keep alive the flame of witness which began with them. This is a monumental speech in Jewish history. This is Moses' farewell address. He is at Kadesh Barnea. He is in sight of the promised land, but he will not set foot in. Verse 32, all the words I am commanding you, guard to do it. Do not add to it or take away from it. Read of something similar in chapter 4, verse 2, where the words do not add or take away from it, do not subtract or deduce. So there are consequences for adding to the word in your own translation. but the Israelites were commanded not to do better, and so too are we. Chapter 13, verse 1, this is the lesson itself. When there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he shall give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign of or the wonder shall come true, of which he has spoken to you, saying, Let us go after other mighty ones, which you have not known, and serve them. Do not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh your Elohim is trying you to know whether you love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul. So those 3 verses are a single sentence. What we're going to do is read them a sentence at a time. So a lot of these sentences are chunks, but the original arrangement of the Bible narrative division was in paragraphs and sentences. It wasn't until 1328, the writing of the Latin Vulgate, that verses were introduced and interjected. But we're going to take it from the top. So there will arise false prophets and people who can perform wonders. They can perform miracles. There is such a thing as satanic supernaturalism, and these are several of the practices are Satan is the one who's being worshipped at a lot of these religious edifices they're commanded to tear down in the second verse of the preceding chapter. But the miracles are in themselves are not a reliable barometer for how spiritually strong and trustworthy such a one is, because Satan can perform signs and wonders. There is such a thing as satanic supernaturalism. So the motive is what comes into the next verse. If his prediction comes to pass, or his miracle manifest, he will have the capital to try and motivate you to worship alternate deities, the rival deities, which you have not known, and serve them. So that these mysterious deities outside of Yahweh are the ones making him do what he's doing, but he is sent there by Yahweh, part of the providence, for the purpose of testing these people, because he wants them to love him with all your hearts and with all your souls, all their faculties and all their capacities. There's a totality of commitment and devotion that he demands, and rightly so. So we cannot be beguiled, persuaded, misled, or manipulated by miracles. We have to look at the motive of the miracle. The motive is the tell-all. So this is especially pertinent to us as we approach the end times, because as we are warned of in the book of Revelation, and even in the Mount Olivet discourses, there will be false messiahs, false prophets performing great signs and wonders. So they're going to be sent by Satan to establish his kingdom on the earth and unleash the tribulation and the system of the beast. So we have to be mindful when miracles do come alive. These miraculous pretenders and predecessors to the singular tense anti-messiah and false prophet. We have been warned, so we have to have the discernment to know when we see it, not to, because they're ultimately going to be geared towards worshiping the beast, the man, the miracle maker themselves. He's going to put up his image in the temple in Jerusalem and command that it be worshipped. But that's getting a little far outside of the text itself. 4th verse. Walk after Yahweh your Elohim, and fear him, and keep his commandments, and obey his voice, and serve him, and cling to him. So now the Christian walk is analogous to the Christian life. When we say we walk the Christian walk, that means we are living the Christian life, but we are to walk after with our footsteps. He had guided them this far from Egypt to the edge of the promised land, and they were about to enter in. Most of the audience that Moses was addressing were on the edge of wilderness wandering. They had escaped from slavery, and they were about to settle in and claim the promised land, but it was all the more incumbent because they had the lessons from the Exodus. The efficiency of their journey was hindered because they did not walk after his ways. They did not fear him or keep his commandments or obey his voice. They had a literal voice at Mount Sinai tell them strict terms what the covenant was, and they were to serve and cling to him. Now that word cling is found in the Edenic original marriage where a husband and wife are to cling to one another, and we are to be similarly wedded to the Almighty on high. And that prophet or that dreamer of dreams is put to death, because he has spoken apostasy against Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, to make you stray from the way in which Yahweh your Elohim commanded you to walk. Thus you shall purge this evil from your midst. So the death penalty is written in the Mosaic Law, but it was not enforced as often as it should have been. We do witness an example in the book of Exodus. There was one who gathered sticks on the Sabbath, and he was smitten by Yahweh to make a point that he is to take the Sabbath seriously. But, there was death penalties for disrespecting your parents. There was death penalties for gay sex. There was death penalties for idolatry. But all of these things happened because they did not put to death the ones who indulged. And this ultimately becomes an issue of love and loyalty, because when you see your friends and your neighbors and your family doing these, it's a test to see whether your love of Yahweh supersedes your love for them. And in Luke 14:28, we are to hate anyone who does not hate his father and mother compared to the love that they bear me. He is not commanding us to hate our parents, but the love that we have for them is to seem as hatred compared to the love that we have for them, is not worthy to be called my disciple. And apostasy, that is worse than the moral pollution of, disrespecting your parents or having gay sex. Apostasy, that word indicates to deviate. It is a deviation from the true Orthodox religion. It veers to unnecessary and unnatural extremes. And it is through apostasy is rooted in human error above all else. So when you trust in your own judgment, you are against Yahweh, the Yahweh who accomplished your redemption, the one who had liberated you from literal bondage. And you shouldn't have made it this far just to drop your own self on your own head, because God did not bring you this far just to drop you on your head. So the choice is yours. Do you want to stay in the way or stray from the way? Do you want to follow these rivals whose motives and intentions and manifestations are predicted to the T? But that word purge just means to get rid of it, get it out of here. It's used throughout the book of Deuteronomy, and it has violent connotations. They are literally to put such a miracle, a satanically supernatural one, to death. Yet these people lived, and because they did, they worked their magic and their evil influence throughout the covenant nation. Verses 6 through 10 is a long sentence. We're going to read it in its entirety. When your brother, the son of your mother, or the son of your daughters, or the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is as your own soul, entices you secretly, saying, Let us go and serve other mighty ones, which you have not known, neither you nor your fathers, or the mighty ones of the people, which are all around you, near to you or afar off you, from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. Do not agree with him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pardon him, nor spare him or conceal him. But you shall certainly kill him. Your hand is first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. And you shall stone him with stones until he dies, because he sought to entice you away from Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. So once more, there's that element of peer pressure when everyone around you, when your brother, your family, your friends, your neighbors are tempting you and trying to seduce you and allure you to follow these idolatrous beings. These this is not the miracle maker anymore. This is the deities he represents, the artificial imagined deities. That's mighty ones, but the element of mystery is once there. That adds to the seductive allure. The mysterious is enchanting, and that always has a sort of appeal and a lull and a pull to the natural man. But these mighty ones are literally all around them. That's why they're to get them out of there, violently eliminate them in their midst. The deities themselves, the edifices, the temples, the shrines, the people are to be gone. That's the only way to get rid of the peer pressure, which is the root cause of a covenant people succumbing to apostasy. But follow not a multitude unto do evil. So just because your neighbor and everyone else around you is sinning, that does not give you license or permission or pretext to sin. That is why we must maintain the integrity of our Christian walk, even when the whole world is getting more wicked, seemingly by the hour and the day. But don't agree with them, don't even listen to them, and don't pardon them, and don't spare them, and don't conceal them. These are the things you are not to do. So they are told to kill him after that. But before that, they are, to give no sanction or quarter to their ideas or even their words, and don't forgive them. This is impardonable. This is the sin of idolatry opens up a host of other evils. As I've argued frequently recently, idolatry is the sin which leads to every other sin, for once we detach ourselves from our infallible moral compass, all bets are off in every other aspect of our life. And don't try and conceal him, but expose him. So it is your job and your duty to be the one that he's telling them if someone does this, cut them, slice them, whatever weapon, it would be shoot them dead for us, but the Israelites didn't have gen. You shall certainly kill him. Your hand is first against him to put him to death, and afterwards the hands of all the people. So you have, in the New Testament, we're taught not to cast the stones unless we are without sin. But, just because this sin was worthy of death in the Old Testament, but you're to be the first one, you are to lay the initiative, you catch them doing it, that means you have the duty and obligation and sacred charge to cast the first stone in their direction. And shall stone him with stones until he dies. So this is the capital punishment. It was by means of stones. A gang of people would hurl stones on top of stones to people, and that would do the trick, because did they go this far just to enslave themselves back into any deity outside of Yahweh? They had worshipped and been exposed to the inferior deities in Egypt, and each one of the 10 plagues was an indictment and a triumph over the respective polytheistic pantheons of the Egyptian system. Verse 11, and let all Israel hear and fear, and not do again such an evil matter as this in your midst. So you're to set the example, and there is nothing like, just getting rid of them, stoning them, all together and all at once that will accomplish this effect of instilling the fear, because no one's going to they calculate the risk. They see this entire community piling stones on me. That's going to, purge any idea in anyone's head. But, they were lax in the enforcement of this law. But it went on in their midst, and they were surrounded by it and troubled by its influence. Verses 12 through 15 is a single sentence. When you hear someone in one of your cities, which Yahweh your Elohim gives to you in dwelling, saying, some men, sons of Belial, have gone out of your midst and led the inhabitants of their city astray, saying, let us go and serve other mighty ones, which you have not known. Then you shall inquire, search out, and ask diligently, and see if the matter is true, and establish that this abomination was done in your midst. You shall certainly smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, putting it under the ban, and all that is in it, and its livestock with the edge of the sword. So when something like this happens, they are warned in advance that something like this will happen. Some men, sons of Belial was more broadly speaking satanic, but in its original and strict application, its academic one, it is Baal, the deity, the storm deity, the Canaanite storm deity, and this was one of the ones that was indigenous to there, and it would pose a perpetual nuisance and pest to them, and it would lead many astray. But inquire, search out, act diligently, verse 14. So they have to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that this is the case, that they are not, inflicting the death penalty on an innocent. They have to find out for certain, for fact, that this one is such a worthy as death, because capital punishment is not something you just dish out like Skittles. It is reserved for the worst offenders in a society. But if this abomination was done, then he has to go. He has to kill him, get rid of him, destroy him, get him out of there violently, the edge of the sword, and the entire livestock of that community. So he's talking about not just families here, but one of the cities. So there's the entire nest within the city. They have to go. Their livestock too. Verse 16. And gather all its plunder into the middle of the street, and completely burn with fire the city and all its plunder before Yahweh your Elohim. And it shall be a heap forever, never to be built again. So Yahweh does not reward the covenant community with the spoils of the apostate or unfaithful. He's telling them to burn it in the fire, purge it, eliminate it, take all their goods, all their bodies, all their animals, and burn them and kill them and purge it, get rid of it, because there is a spiritual health that he is prescribing prescriptions for the spiritual health of his community. And these people have to have no place. They should not even live or breathe in the promised land. And because the letter of this law was not followed to the T, their influence did flourish. So it's pretty, we moderns look at it and scoff at the notion of, we have religious plurality in the United States of America. If my neighbor wants to worship 20 gods or no gods at all, that's there's nothing we can do about that. But in the community that was defined by religion, they weren't religiously pluralistic. And the other rivals, the neighboring civilizations had nothing like it. They could care less if one of their citizens or inhabitants worshipped the god of a foreign entity. Or worshipped a foreign god. They didn't care. They did not put as much stock on the purity of their religion. It was kind of an anything goes. There are different gods for different things. Choose which one. It's really up to you. Maybe that's an oversimplification. But verses 17 and 18 are a single sentence in the closing of this chapter and the lesson. And none of that which is put under the band is to cling to your hand, so that Yahweh turns from the fierceness of his displeasure, and shall show you mercy, love, and increase you, as he swore to your fathers. When you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to keep all his commandments, which I command you today, to do what is right in the eyes of Yahweh your Elohim. So the ban is what we read of earlier, that was to go on the apostates, the idolaters, the false, just the satanic stewards, really. But you still have to, avoid the fierceness of his displeasure. You don't want to get Yahweh angry, because he will burn you and consume you, and he's telling his people to burn all your goods and livestock. But this is how they are to show, demonstrate, and prove that he is compassionate, loving, and he will increase them and multiply them. We read of in Deuteronomy 1:11 that he will increase you 1,000-fold. But interesting story. One time I saw a prosperity gospel heretic on television trying to convince Christians or saps to donate $1,000 to his ministry and they would become millionaires based on the promise. But if you connect it to the 10th verse, the earlier one, you realize he's talking about the increase in people. This guy was using it to enrich himself, and it's just sad that there's actually enough saps out there for someone to get away with it like that. But when you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim and keep all his commands, then all will be well. This is what they're to do. They're to do it without question. They're to do it habitually. They're to do it by instinct and habit, and they are not to give sanction or quarter to sin or sinner in their lives and in their communities. So this may seem a bit extreme, but it is a perfect design. It did come from Yahweh. This is what he intended for his covenant community, and it could easily be argued that if they followed the death penalty measures, such as himself, as he inflicted it and executed it on the gatherer of sticks on the Sabbath, then they may have survived longer. But that takes us a little far ahead of ourselves. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.